I know you're all ready for lunch, but yeah, thank you for staying for my talk. So it's entitled STRATOS Using Visualization to Support Decision Strategy in Strategic Software Release Planning. And so these are my lovely co-authors. Just a little bit shout out to Tiffany, who's going to be demoing this work actually at the exhibit hall later this afternoon and tomorrow morning during the coffee breaks. So if you have time to check it out, please do. All right, so without further ado, I would just like to talk about the story of software release planning because that's what really my work is about. And I'm going to give you an example. So let's look at this app called Snappy. And imagine a small startup is trying to create this as the next Snapchat app. So they go to Kickstarter, and they got a few investors and consumers, and they made some research on what the best features of their app should have. And here are just some of them, as you can see. There's like, of course, you have to be able to send text messages, you have to be able to send photos, and then there's this one feature in here that I'm just going to call Feature X, and that is supposed to be the unique feature that Snappy would have, and it will set it apart from all the other Snapchat imitations, right? So they had a very successful Kickstarter campaign, so they received $15,000, and they're also under pressure with other competition, so like with other similar apps. So they're trying to release their app into market as soon as possible. And so they have release 1, which is basically kind of like the first version that you will get when you first get the app. And then later on, maybe a few months, they will have an update where they give some more features into the app. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated because not only do you have to choose which features you should have on these releases, but you'll have to divide your limited resources such as time and budget into actually being able to do those features. And also at the same time, still trying to make an app that will make your stakeholders happy. And so as you can see, it kind of gets a little bit complicated in that sense. And if you're just looking at numbers, sometimes it's kind of hard to make sense of the data. And also, it's also hard to communicate your point of view to your stakeholders later on when you say, oh, I'm going to do this plan. And then they're going to be sitting there saying, we don't know. We're just seeing numbers. So we try to use visualization to support planners in being able to choose an optimal plan, also be able to communicate their thoughts to their stakeholders. And in our paper, we have developed design guidelines with the help of a release planning domain expert. And if you want to know more details, feel free to read our paper. But for now, I'm just going to say that we took 3 existing visualization, namely the Sankey diagrams, parallel coordinates, and the graph layout to combine them into a hybrid visualization, basically taking this data and turn it into something more visual. And this is what we called STRATOS, which is kind of short for Strategic Software Release Planning Oversight Support Tool. And what you're seeing in here is basically 3 alternative ways or plans on how to get Snappy into market. I'm going to go back to that further on, but on the top in here is that you get plan headers, and just more information is that you get the stakeholder satisfaction bar charts, which are basically how happy your stakeholders will be in prediction if you follow this plan. The more green it is, the better it is. Down, you can see more information on the tooltip about your stakeholders. And also you see your initial amount of resources and how they flow towards your different releases, shown here in the middle. And as you can see in here, there are 3 releases. What happens is that, if you remember earlier, I was saying that the Snappy people are planning to release in 2 stages, release 1, then release 2. And in here, there's a 3rd release. And there's nothing that, as you can see on the top, there's no allocated resources that flows to it. And that's because they have limited amount of resources. And so there have to be some sacrifices. Some features will have to be kind of postponed. On the bottom here are your required resources if you follow the plan. And here you would see the discrepancies where if you have gaps on top, that means you have insufficient resources. Well, you have surplus resources if there are gaps on the bottom. And these resources flow towards your features, which are located here at the bottom. And the size of the length of the white part is actually your kind of like a summary of your required resources. The longer the white part is, that means you need more resources. And here at the bottom, there's the stakeholder priority vote, which is essentially how much value did the stakeholder place on that specific feature. If you click on one features, you would see their dependent features, because some features cannot be implemented without implementing this first one. And this kind of is important when you're trying to actually build your system up in different releases. There's also some more tooltip information about the feature if you hover over it. All right, so what can you do with this? Well, essentially, you can compare the alternative plans through the differences in their releases, stakeholder happiness and resource allocation. And you can kind of just like show this to your stakeholders later on, saying that I'm going to be choosing this plan because, as you can see in here, these features are being implemented, stuff like that. Okay, so how does this enable decision support? Well, we have a qualitative study where originally we have 16 participants. We have to discard participant number 2 because they were missing some requirements. But essentially, 3 of them are from industry where they actually practice software release planning. And we have help from our domain expert in recruiting the rest, who are graduate students with release planning experience. And some of them also have prior visualization experience. So the study goes with 2 phases. The first one is the familiarization phase, where we help the participants build familiarity with reading and interpreting the data using our visualization. And the second part is an exploration phase, where they were asked to explore a data set that's more reminiscent of real-world release planning, and then we allowed them to choose the best one, the best plan in the end. So this is what their data set looks like. There's 5 alternatives. And just the one that's highlighted in here is alternative number 2, which essentially is what we placed there to be the most balanced, in the sense that it has a balanced stakeholder happiness, it has a balanced resource allocation, and it tries to publish as much features as you can have. While alternatives 1, 3, and 4, they're also there. They have their own merits. We're just kind of like shuffling them around. So it's not that they're not balanced or anything like that. They just have some other merits on their own. While alternative 5 is kind of like that weird thing that we place there, just to kind of see if our participants will see if alternative 5 is actually bad or not. Okay, so going back to our participants, here they are on the distribution on what they choose at the end. And 7 of them chose the well-balanced plan, which is alternative 2. And this is their confidence level on how they chose it. Some of them decided that they would choose 2 things, and we have some more of their justifications in our paper on if you would like to see more of that. Now, you may be wondering, less than half of our participants chose alternative number 2, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I'm going to argue that it is actually a good thing, because in release planning, it's really a subjective thing, and different companies have different values. Sometimes they believe that, oh, we want this to happen in the release 1, even if there's some trade-offs to it, even if it looks bad later on. But more or less, we don't want to limit the planners into choosing just one alternative. We don't want to just say, hey, pick this, because that's just, you can just basically automate the system. We want them to actually explore it, so in the end, they can have a well-informed decision. So just to illustrate this, I'm going to go back to the example of Snappy, and here are the 3 alternative plans on how it should be released into market. And so here's the first one. In release 1, as you can see, there's like this huge gap. You have some extra money in there. Why are you not using it, kind of thing? And you're losing 2 features in the end. Same with alternative 3. This time you have some extra resources on release 2, and you're also losing a few 2 features in the end. And then there's release 2. There's alternative 2, where you have sort of like gaps in between as well, but they're definitely less than the other ones. And you're only losing 1 feature. So should I pick this? Let's examine that feature that's being left behind. That's actually feature X. So if you remember, this is the feature that's supposed to set Snappy. It's like that feature that sets it apart from the other Snapchat imitations. So it's up to you to choose now whether you'd want to kind of have more features, but don't have feature X, or have feature X but have less features. So I hope that kind of illustrates in the gist of what you need to do as a release planner. And so going back to our participants, what I would think in here is that it's good that they were actually able to explore, and we have their justifications on our study on why they chose these alternatives. And the good part is that nobody chose alternative 5, which is that weird thing. But I'm going to go back to to participant number 8, as you see in there. He wasn't able to choose any of the alternative, but I'll go back to him later on after I talk about our discussions. So we found some decision strategies that our participants have chosen to do in our study. So the first is that resource allocation-based decision strategy, where their strategy are governed more about how balanced the resources are being allocated between each releases. The next one is a stakeholder satisfaction-based decision strategy, where our participants preferred a happier stakeholder set. And then there's also the feature-based decision strategy, where they look more into how features are being implemented. Are the ones that have a lot of dependencies being implemented further at the beginning of your releases? So there's also another interesting things, because even if they chose those strategies, some of them will end up with a different chosen alternative because they have this different inclinations. So we have visual inclination, numeric inclination, and mixed inclination. And just to give you an overview, here is a reenacted, maybe slightly exaggerated video of a person with a visual inclination. So here she is trying to leverage the differences between the resources using her fingers. She basically used visual cues and tried to compare alternatives based on those. Here is what a numeric inclination looked like. So they used a smartboard to basically write down the numbers. They tried to calculate it, so they tended to rely more on the numbers, as you can see in here. And then there's the mixed, who showed both the behaviors of a visually inclined and numerically inclined participant, where they used the visual cues to leverage the differences, but they also tried to go into the finer details, such as the numeric values, and compared, made their own calculations as well. And this is important because going back to participant number 8, he is numerically inclined, and he focused on the feature dependencies, how the features are being implemented. And so he had to go through each feature one by one, and I think we weren't really able to support that in our tool. And also the numerically inclined will have to go through the tooltips to see the actual numbers. And so talking back to our domain expert, he suggested that maybe we should have a dashboard where we can combine some elements of the spreadsheet data and the visualization itself, because this is a huge mental load, and that we should improve our support for those. So just for future work, yes, better support for numerically inclined participants, and maybe support for collaboration, because these things usually is done within groups, and maybe using other visualization techniques, because if you're a part of the Viz community, you're maybe looking at our visualization right now and saying that is not what a traditional Viz should look like, because we're trying to put in as much data into the screen all at once, and most of the time we will want them to be compartmentalized and other things. What is interesting, though, is that our participants and our domain expert didn't talk about actually removing things from the visualization, but rather adding more things. So that's actually quite interesting. So adjusting the design guidelines that we have, depending on these new things that we have in the future, and further investigation, because like I said, most of our, all of our participants have release planning experience, but only 3 of them were actually from industry. So perhaps they have a different dynamic in industry that we'll probably want to see and support for decision making. All right, so I hope I was able to show that decision-making in software release planning can be supported through the visualization of the interrelated factors of release planning. And I would like to thank you again for staying, and I'm now ready to accept questions. Everybody's hungry.
Can I ask one question before leaving?
Jeremy has a question.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Jeremy.
So, hi, Jeremy Boy and Ruhe. In your experiment, I was trying to look at the visualizations that were in gray, talking about deceptive visualizations before. How different was option 2 from option 3?
Right.
Because they looked extremely similar.
So I'm just going to go back there. Oh, no, not this one.
Now, when you had all 5,
Yep.
yeah.
This one, right. So you're saying they're quite similar. I don't have the
Option 2 and
data.
option 3, yeah.
Yeah, so option 2 and option 3 are actually quite similar, but there are some differences on how the features are being implemented into those different releases. So
Okay.
some of the features that are being released in release number 1 are actually being postponed or something like that, and those features will have different priorities based on the stakeholder priority votes. So in that sense, we tried to put as much balance on what features are with higher votes on alternative 2 or alternative 3 has kind of like that. Some of the lesser voted are being, being implemented early on rather than, yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a mix and match in that sense.
Okay, so you really need to have heavy background knowledge to be able to distinguish between 2 and 3.
Yeah, which is why we preferred that our all of our participants actually had release planning experience so that they actually know the dynamics already.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.